First of all, why should I care about all of this? I grew up in a family where on my mom's side, they were cattle ranchers near Whitehall. And on my dad's side, his family were homesteaders from Sweden, migrated between Deer Lodge and Anaconda around the racetrack. And both of my parents ended up going to, at that time, Montana State University. Now, of course, University of Montana. Just like it was Montana State College, now it's the Montana State University of Montana State, Bozeman. You know, all these names, we come up with all these interesting names. When my wife was president of Western, it was Western Montana College, and now it's University of Montana Western. You know how we've done all these, we've changed all these things around, right and left all over the place. But I was raised in Havre for the first 6 months of my life. My mom taught in Hingham, and my dad was a newspaper guy with the Havre Daily News. And he'd been a very fine college runner, and that's how he got his job. Heart of the Depression, and how did it all work out for him? It was because he had been a runner. They needed a sports editor, writer. He just had a love affair with Montana, and that was kind of, in many ways, why it ended up being my love affair as well. And, you know, there's so many reasons why this special magical place has such significance to it. And that is, with history, all you can do is get a few snippets here, there, there. That's all you can do. You can't tell the whole story. It's impossible. And then it hits me, too, that what I like to do, and that is, I like to look at things through a magnifying glass. That magnifying glass is I'm in here. So I'm delighted that I have the Billings Gazette here of, let's see, Sunday, May the 26th, 1962. And the page I happened to turn to of the Billings Gazette was Honored Unknown Soldier, Plenty Coup, Peace from Red and White Blood. That was the page that I turned to. Son of a gun. And I think again, how small Montana is, and yet Montana is so amazingly big. So I look through things with a magnifying glass often as well. And then every once in a while, I kind of like to doctor things. And so I'd like to get my tape out. And some of those things where I think things have gone wrong, I really would like to kind of fix things up a little bit. I'd like to make it better than what it was. So that gives you kind of a clue as to how I kind of look at story. So I'm always trying to fill in the puzzle pieces. So what I'm going to do with you tonight is give you my take, looking at some of the Montana leaders. Now, what I'd like to do is to just give you my own take on a few. I can only do a few. You have to understand that. There's only a little bit I can do. Now, along with being an educator, and I was a high school teacher for a long time. I taught at Missoula Sentinel. I taught 3 years in the Department of Defense schools in Germany. I taught at Montana State University in Bozeman and at the University of Montana in Missoula. And when my wife was the head of the college in Dillon, I taught down there. When she was president of Wayne State College in Nebraska, I taught there. So you can see I've never been able to keep a job. That's the bottom line. But I also put in a full military career. And one of the things that if I got my wallet out right now, I have a card that I've never given up on, and I carry it with me all the time, and that's my Army values. I carry that card with me. And before I was all done, I retired as a one-star general. I was the commander of troops of the Montana Army Guard. I had over 3,000 troops under my command. But if you just take a look at what are the definitions of these, loyalty and duty and respect and selfless service and honor and integrity and personal courage, isn't that very often what leadership is? It doesn't matter what it is. You can be the head of this board. You better be living up to a lot of what that's all about. If you're a teacher over here in one of your schools, if you're a doctor down here, this beautiful facility you have down here, you know, think of it. It doesn't matter what the career path, but you had better have these kinds of attributes about you in order to pull it all off. Okay. So, now I have a few favorites. My all-time favorite story is one that deals with a great expedition, and that is two guys that were co-commanders. I was very lucky that when I was a one-star, the two-star that was my boss, he and I became very, very close friends. And I always thought that this was the great leadership team that really drove the way to the American West. By land and water, unknown spaces. I love that story. And of course, the big dad for all of that was Thomas Jefferson, because he was in the back of their minds every single day. 2 years, 4 months, and 10 days, 7,689 miles. Wow. And then a young woman with 30 plus guys, kidnapped right down in the area around the headwaters at Three Forks. Her nation, the Mandan peoples of central North Dakota. And when she got back to where she could have been, when they met up with her own people, where they finally got the horses down in the Bitterroot area, she could have stayed with her own people. And you know what? I got to go see the ocean. And when they got out there, one of the things I always am amazed, that was there was a beached whale. She was scared silly once she saw the ocean. When she got the word there was a beached whale, guess what? I must go see the beached whale. So, why this guy? Because this guy was there at a time when somebody had to be there to kind of bind a country that was just falling apart in so many ways. So I have to admit, these are very special heroes for me. They're ones that are my keepers. I can go on and on with each one of these in great detail, I'll tell you. Okay. Tommy, are you awake? There we go. All right, now I'm just going to give you a hodgepodge. That's all I can do. So everybody can remember when there was a governor by the name of Tim Babcock. Well, guess what? I always kind of think that, you know, if you're in a relationship, it's probably going to be your partners in crime. Well, Betty Babcock was there with Tim. You know, he served that time, but she was the grand dame of Montana. And she devoted so much of her own personal life to public service. A lot of people aren't aware of that because they think he was the one that's in the headlines. But what was she doing? She was the one that fought so hard to see the restoration of our capital. And you know, we have a capital that I'll tell you, we can walk around like this. Yeah, I want to show you our capital because ours is a humdinger, I can tell you. And the new State Historical Society building that we have, and you know, we're putting on this beautiful, wonderful addition. And the two of us were just chatting about this, that one of the big dreams I have as president of the Montana Historical Society board right now is that I want to see all of our wonderful museums in Montana sing the praises of every other one. And that everybody's given everybody else their address. Oh, you're heading toward Miles City, Range Rider Museum, you got to go see it, it's unbelievable. You're going over toward Glendive, huh? Yeah, oh, gee, they've got a great museum in Glendive. How about Sydney? How about Glasgow? How about Havre Beneath the Streets? Oh, if you're going to go beneath the streets, you got to go see Beneath the Streets over there in Butte. I mean, you got to do all these things. In other words, we should all be worrying about everybody else. Tell that story. And she was the great advocate for the rewriting of our state constitution. Most of us would say, I never knew that. But she was a tremendous advocate. And you know, when we rewrote our state constitution, you know what? We were the model for the United States. The model. Not bad, huh? Okay. Jack Horner, now some of you know that name. Jack Horner now out in Seattle, but spent a long time at Montana State University in Bozeman, a kid that was raised in Shelby, Montana, and most of us are kind of aware of Maiasaurus. And this was the cutting edge of paleontology, and it was Montana. Our Museum of the Rockies in Bozeman, and you've seen that, what a wonderful place that is. But the largest Tyrannosaurus Rex in the world, there he is. I walked into the Smithsonian one time. I walked in just kind of like this. Nobody was asking me anything, but I just said, you know why I'm standing here like this? I'm from Montana, but you see that T-Rex over there? He's from where I'm from. He's from Montana. This lady came right back and said, I don't think you look as old as him. Ha, ha, ha. I thought I was being funny, I guess. Okay. All right, Tommy. All right, Joseph Dixon, the famous maverick Republican. Now this guy, and if you go to the state capitol, you will see that we have a number of these little statuettes. They're just shoulder up. That are different people that have made a difference with Montana. But here's one of them. He advocated for the federal graduated income tax. Where did that come from? It came from Montana. That's where the whole thing even originated. The old age pension programs. A guy from Montana. Raising taxes on the mines. So why do we care? Because he was a guy who was principled and said, I'm going to make it happen. I will work as hard as I can. Now, I'm not going to win all the time. He didn't win all the time. But do we all win all the time? No. All right. Wild Bill Kelly. Now, here was one of the all-time greats. He was the record-setting Grizzly quarterback. This guy was described one time pugnacious on the field, didn't swagger, arrogance was never part of his makeup, the greatest Grizz, the NFL Hall of Fame, and he died when he was 29 years old, and he was considered to be, he would sit around and sign autographs and have his picture taken with every kid that came near him. He was that kind of a person. Most of us never heard him, but what a guy. Emmanuel Taylor Gordon. You all know where White Sulphur Springs is. Tomorrow when Tommy and I are heading over to my meeting in Helena, we're going to go through White Sulphur Springs. And here was a guy who had one of the great voices, who came back after his career and came back to his hometown of White Sulphur Springs, Montana. He was called Snowball, didn't bother him though. But the kid that worked awfully hard, this golden voice, had one of the greatest voices of America at the time. I can remember as a little kid, I don't know why it's a memory that's there, when we would go from Harlowton to Whitehall and to Grandpa and Grandma's place over between Anaconda and Deer Lodge, we would often go the White Sulphur Springs to Townsend, down to the junction and then on over. And I can still remember as a kid going down the street and seeing this man. And I said to my dad, who is that? Never forgot it. That this fabulous voice, fighting the long odds, and became one of the greatest in the entertainment field. And he went back to his home roots. Another great story. Daniel McKay. Now, how many counties do we have in Montana? 56. How many counties should we probably have? Not 56. We have probably 20. But guess what? This was the guy who was a businessman out of Glasgow, Montana, who just happened to have a brickyard surveying operation. And he went around on a big white horse, fast talking, and said, you know what we need to do? We need to have a county. And then you'll have a county seat, and then you don't have to go very far in order to get licensed or to pay your taxes. Hey, that sounds like a darn good idea. Furthermore, your town is going to grow like nobody's business. So he rode a white horse around all over the place, and he is the guy who we could say is really the big man when it came. 7 counties personally, and a big hand in 5 more. So 12 counties and 1 guy basically is the responsible party. Gee, many Christmas. He's a fun one. All right, Frank Linderman. Friend of the Indians, author, chronicles. I know you have a couple of pieces for sale out here. Linderman. 5 volumes of traditional Indian tales. And he wanted to create the reservations for the Cree and the Chippewa. Often a lonely voice. But here was a man who wanted to tell the story. because he saw the need for land and for a continuous life for Native peoples. He's one of them. I'd really like to have met him. Evelyn Cameron. Well, if you haven't been to Terry, Montana, you gotta go. All right, you're going from Billings now, and you're heading over toward, you're going on to Miles City, going on to Glendive, and then you're gonna head out of the state, and you're probably gonna have to, on the way over, make a couple of stops. And one of them you better turn off. Terry, Montana, and go and see that wonderful, wonderful little photography museum of hers. Came from money. She and her husband came to Montana with the idea that they were going to raise these unbelievable horses. That was the idea. Well, born to English wealth, but fate steps in, and so this became her outlet. And she told the story of the sheep herder, the homesteader, the hunter, like nobody else ever did, through a whole long period of time, from the turn of the century until she passed away. Her unbelievable photography is a great testament to what our story, God bless you, is all about. And here's the neat thing about her. She came from money. Mattered not to her. Every cowboy was her friend. She just wanted to capture somebody that was moving sheep, had a sheep wagon, was getting bucked off a horse, was fixing a broken shoe. Evelyn Cameron. Arthur Stone. Now if you go to Missoula sometime, you can see a mountain there that is called Stone Mountain, named for this amazing newspaper man. But he was the one that started the School of Journalism. Now, U of M in Missoula has always had the School of Journalism, but the fact is, we know the journalists are all over the place. So you have your wonderful Carbon County News. We've got the Billings Gazette and the Miles City Star and the Bozeman Chronicle and the Missoulian and the Great Falls Tribune and everybody else and all these wonderful little newspapers. I love to read the little town newspapers. And in many ways, the little newspapers are a real way of binding a community together, because they will say something about somebody who has passed away, about a recent marriage, how the team did in the ball game, something that is planned for by the city council. They can make a great deal of difference, but he advocated the highest of journalist standards. So in my book, he's one of the all-timers. Okay. Joseph Kinsey Howard. Boy, what a writer he was. Often called the conscience of Montana. Now get this. The first book that he published, 1943, anytime there has ever been any kind of best book ever written about Montana, his book of 1943 is the one that has always stood out as the best book to tell Montana's story. A long-time newspaper man, and he really could tell a story. He was the conscience of Montana. The powers of description, and he really hammered home about places like the Montana Power Company and the Anaconda copper mining. And Daly, and all the others. Okay, the Bear family. Now, you're driving on Highway 12, and you say we're driving from Townsend and we're heading toward Roundup, and you are going to see a sign right along Highway 12, and it'll say Bear Family Museum, home. You gotta go take a look at it if you haven't been there yet, let me tell you. So Charles Margarita in Alberta, the largest wool producer and shipper in Montana history, 300,000 head of sheep. That's a lot of sheep. But here's what he did. He supported the arts like crazy. He wanted to see the supportive communities. Now you've all been to Billings, and you have all been to the Bear Theater. You all have done that. Millions for scholarships in hospitals and museums and libraries. My little hometown of Harleton, White Sulphur Springs, Rygate, Roundup, I can tell you, college scholarships, thanks to the Bear family. Come to Harleton, you stub your toe real bad, you got to go to the hospital, God bless you. Well, guess what? Wheeling Memorial Hospital, it wouldn't be around if it had not been for that family right there. So, story goes that somebody asked him one time, well, Mr. Bear, how many sheep do you run? And his comment right back was, well, if you have to ask me, I can just tell you, way more than you have. Okay, Lou Bodecker. Now here is another one. The first Montana Highway Patrol chief. We see highway patrolmen out there all the time. Well, he started the highway patrol, this guy. But his idea was to ensure public safety. And he pushed through the idea that we needed to have speed limits, that we needed to take care of things. He was the Montana State Prison Warden later on, Public Service Commissioner. I mean, look at this. Isn't that quite a career of giving? So, here's somebody that most of you have never ever heard of. Okay. Next one. Senator Thomas Walsh. Now, again, if you go to Helena and you're there on the main lobby floor, you can go and you'll see the bust of this man. This guy, the expert in mining and of Constitution law, one of the great political giants of the 20s and the 30s, he was the one that pushed for the investigation of the famous Teapot Dome scandal. He was involved with women's suffrage, the League of Nations, laws against child labor, and this is the guy. He's from Montana. Look at that. A straight shooter, don't ever ask for favors. It would be like asking the statue of civic virtue for a chaw of tobacco. That's what the New York Sun said about him. He walks the straight and narrow. Okay. Alma Jacobs. Alma Jacobs was a Great Falls librarian. Later on, she became the state of Montana librarian. She, in many ways, could be considered to be the mother of the libraries of Montana. She pushed to see that every community possible would have a library in its own ranks. My dad was a very close friend of hers, and he used to say that you would never have met a kinder, more gracious woman than her. She just plain cared deeply about it, what it was she did. But you can see, when black women had little clout anywhere in America, she had a lot of clout in Montana. Mark Roscoe. Now, I always kind of like this guy because, and Tommy will like him too, because he happened to go to a small university that you and I are aware of. Low-key, tough-minded prosecutor. A lot of people think of him as a governor only, but the thing is, winning 54 of 56 murder cases, losing state races 3 times and later elected to serve as governor 2 times, and had, look at this, was considered one time the most popular governor in the entire country. And here he was a guy who had lost, and had lost. But he was, the thing that I liked about him was he was just a downright nice guy. One time I was at an airport in St. Louis, and I was just walking down carrying my little bag, because the other one I'd checked through, and all of a sudden this guy just says, "Hey, Hal Joe." And I looked over and I said, "Governor, how are you?" There he was with his family. I thought I was going to miss my plane because he wanted to spend all this time chit-chatting about the fact that My dad, who was a good pal of his too, my dad periodically would write him a little paper about how he thought he ought to run Montana. He would pin them in his office and refer to him. He said, that dad, he just kept me honest. I always kind of thought that was kind of funny, but just a downright nice guy. Okay. All right, K. Ross Toole. Well, K. Ross, I wrote both my master's and doctoral dissertations. He was my advisor. But his college lecture was, so did anybody go to school and have him as a professor?
I did.
And that auditorium, 1,000 students. You didn't show up late and you didn't leave early. Everybody was fascinated with him, weren't they? Oh, he was unbelievable. But here he was, this captivating history professor. He was just one of those kind of people that I love these. Montana, an Uncommon Land, still one of the absolute classics of Montana. And then The State of Extremes and The Rape of the Great Plains. So I had finished my coursework, and he was my advisor, and he said, do you think one of these days it might be wise that you might get your thesis done? I said, Dr. Toole, I don't have any idea what I'm going to even do one on. He said, I know where you're from. I said, you do? He said, yeah, you're from central Montana. You should write about what you know about it. And so I wrote my thesis on a history of the Upper Musselshell Valley, where I was from. And I dedicated it to him because he was the one that got me kicking away. And then later on in a dissertation, he was one of my 2 advisors for that as well. But the thing is, he was just, this was him in so many ways. I love Montana. We've got to make good things happen. Okay. Norman McLean. Well, you know, river runs through it. Now, you know it was the Blackfoot River, is what the story is about, which is if you go from Missoula, you head out toward Milltown, and you're heading up, and you're on your way toward Great Falls. That was where the story was, except the photography couldn't be done there, so they had to go down and make use of the Madison and the Gallatin, because the highway went right along, and they couldn't get enough shots that looked like what he was trying to get across. Now, why did he do it? Well, he called it one time, it was the love affair to his own family. He was a professor at the University of Chicago, and the story goes, he was so critical of his students and their writing that one of them asked one time, well, Dr. McLean, since you're so critical of us all the time and you use red marker on everything any one of us ever write, what have you written? And he decided, you know, maybe I better do it. And he wrote this classic. And of course, you know, if you haven't read that one, you've got to. And then this one, The Tragedy of the Man Gulch Fire. If you go to the Gates of the Mountains, so if you're driving from Helena to Great Falls, and most of us have done the Gates of the Mountains, and you know that tremendous tragedy. I will never forget one time when I was talking about that in one of my classes, and I had a young man said, my uncle was one of the 9 young men. Everything just stopped, as you can imagine. What a story, though. Okay. Sonny Holland. Now, here is a real gem of a guy. Longtime coach, Montana State, Bozeman. An All-American football player, usually considered to be the greatest of all of the athletes that ever came out of Bozeman. And 7 years coaching then, and then 15 years as the alumni director, but just one of those people who was not only dedicated, hard-charging, but he was a real leader. He made a tremendous difference, not only to athletic programs, but to academic programs at Montana State. He was one of the best. Okay. William Van Orsdale, Brother Van. Well, here he was, a Methodist missionary, and he was often called Brother Van, kind, thoughtful guy. He was a circuit rider. He didn't have a church as such. He would just get on his big black horse. He had a black cape and a black hat, and he would ride from one ranch to another, just going from place to place to place. But this guy, one time, he rides into Raidersburg. Raidersburg is between Three Forks and Townsend, off on the side of the road, and you'll see a sign for it. And he rides in, black horse, all dressed in black, and the cowboys are coming out of the bar like this, and they're madder than hops and half polluted by then, and they are really cranky because there had been some real thievery of some cattle. And one of them says, "Look at that guy." No doubt about it. He's got to be the one or one of them. In fact, he's probably the leader of that whole outfit. And so they were going to hang him. They actually fashioned a noose, put it around his neck, and he began to sing in this rich baritone voice, "Dear my God to thee." And one of the drunken cowboys said, "Anybody that sings that well and knows every word sure as heck can't be any kind of a thief." And they went into the bar, and they sat at the table right there in the front while he had a ministerial service. But there's another side of him. You see this? He cared very deeply about our lost cause children. Very much involved. Wonderful ideals, one of the greatest of all of them. Chief Plenty Coups. Now, you know, I told you, and I had to make the circle, and my buddy there said, "As you're coming around that circle, why do you have to go and stop?" I said, "I don't go to Red Lodge, that I got to go and say hi to Plenty Coups, the last of the great hereditary Crow." But consider this more than anything, a peacekeeper. One saying, you know, we've got to learn how to live together. And he negotiated so many of the treaties and the land disputes. A many-faceted man. If you haven't been to the state park, when you go to Billings, if you're driving between Billings, just starting out a little bit toward Laurel, and you'll see a sign that will say, "Go south sometime and go see it." From here, it's not that far where you could do it, and you could take kind of back roads to get across, but you've got to go and see the state park one time. I was so deeply honored that one time I was asked to go over there and speak. That to me was one of my all-time favorites, but he was just a man who saw that you just talk about the goodness, the fact that people need to live together and care about each other. I like that Plenty Cool. Okay. All right. Francis Bardano. Now, if you take a look at him, you can see that this man was one that had one of those famous issues that a lot of people have with the cleft palate. And he was, when he spoke in the Montana legislature, everything stopped. Now, if you went to watch the legislature this time, or if you saw anything that was on TV, you really began to wonder, my goodness, does anybody listen to anybody else at all? When Francis Bardano spoke, they listened. Now you can see, considered a fiscal conservative, but a social liberal. Somehow he was able to balance things out, and here he was, a farmer rancher, 18 terms, second longest, but in so many ways he was the architect of what a legislature ought to be. So, he's one of the heroes. Where is he? He's in the Montana State Capitol. When you go over, be sure you walk around and take a look at all of these people. But he was something else. He was the one that wanted to see the deinstitutionalization of Boulder and Warm Springs. That was one of his great dreams. Okay. Granville Stewart. The jack of all trades, public-spirited, gold miner, rancher, vigilante, president of the Montana Territorial Council, U.S. envoy to Paraguay and Uruguay, founder of the Montana Historical Society, public-spirited, high ideals, worked for order and civilization, a front line, not a sign line leader. Gee, many Christmas, what the heck didn't he do? He was really one of the giants. Anytime you can read anything about the Stewart boys, especially Granville. He was one of them. That was something else. Okay. All right, John and Frank Craighead. Now the Craighead boys were two of those who were trained as scientists, and they were the ones that did the initial studies about Montana and the wild places like the grizzly bears, and investigating the nation to the saving of the landscape. And you know, when you see, when Tommy and I were in Yellowstone yesterday, for the second you begin to see the bison, the world stops. People have to get out, they want to see the bison. They're just interested in seeing anything that represents kind of the wild places, anything that represents something that is special. You know, the old line about Montana is what America used to be. I think there's a lot of truth to that. And you see it when you go to Yellowstone. You will just see it. But these two were just so diligent about ensuring that we were going to keep our landscapes and that we were going to keep our animals, that we were going to be sure that science was going to be instrumental in what Montanans are about. Now the fact is, both of them have now passed away. These two amazing men, though, they were really something. Okay. Burton K. Wheeler. Anti-war, isolationist, progressive, fought the Anaconda Company, tooth and nail, straight shooter, embraced the job of senator, 24 years in office, no compromise, look him in the eye, offered the vice president in 1940. So, is there a chance he could have been president? Guess who he stood up to? Franklin Delano Roosevelt. When you go over to the state capitol, go over and take a look, champion of Montana and its right, civic engagement, an independent person, nonpartisan, the famous Teapot Dome. He was the man that was instrumental in making sure that it came to light. Father Pierre Jean de Smet. This man, who they say traveled over 200,000 miles, he was a Catholic missionary priest. If you ever get a chance to go south of Missoula and you go down to Stevensville and see the beautiful, beautiful church down there. But the thing that really in my book makes him stand out, and that is, he was one who stood up for the Indians. He was there when the negotiations went on between tribal peoples and the U.S. government. And he was there to be sure that the Indians were not going to get finagled. So not only a remarkable man, you know, just the kind of attributes, things that we are all impressed with, but the fact is that he really cared deeply about everybody. Okay, he's one I'd like to have known. Well, Robert Scriver. Now there's a guy, if you go over and take a look at the Historical Society, and we're building this beautiful new edition, and you'll see the famous bucking horse that is there with the cowboy on top of him. But this man, who was a kid out of Browning, Montana, went to college, came back, and was the music teacher. And he liked to dabble, and he decided after time, you know what I really want to do more than anything else, and that is, I want to tell the stories of the West. And the greatest of all the Lewis and Clark statues is the one that is in Fort Benton, Montana. And it is the one that shows the two commanders, and it shows the young woman, and it shows the puppy dog, and it shows the little babe. And it is considered to be the greatest of all of the pieces ever done on the Lewis and Clark expedition. But his work was just totally, totally amazing. If you ever get a chance to just pick up any of the works that will show many of his pieces of sculpture, they're just astounding pieces. All right, Senator Lee Metcalf, kid out of the Valley County. Senator Metcalf, and many of you are familiar with the fact that there is actually a place called the Great Bear Wilderness in the Absaroka Beartooth Wilderness. And If you go south from Missoula and you're driving down toward Stevensville and heading on toward Hamilton, and you can go down to the Metcalf Wildlife Refuge. Again, he was one who wanted to see wilderness. He wanted to be sure that conservation was instrumental and part of the landscape. So he was one of them. That was one of the true powerhouses. Okay. Let's go to the next one. A.B. Bud Guthrie. At one time, where I lived in Missoula, Montana, A.B. Bud Guthrie and his wife, Carol, were our next door neighbors. One time, I was walking home from Sentinel High School where I was teaching, and my wife at that time, stay-at-home mom, she would kind of take a look at, and our son would go out, and he had one of those little wheelie things, those plastic kind of things, a three-wheel jobby, and he would come and start to meet me. So he is coming up the street, and he has a sucker in his mouth, and I took a look at him and said, "Where did you get that? Mom didn't give you that. I know darn well that's not good for your teeth." "No, my friend Bud gave it to me." "Oh, Bud." I go home and I said, "Sheila, some guy named Bud gave Scott this candy. I don't know if that's really quite appropriate." "Oh, we're invited to go over and say hi to him right now." So we went over and met the man who is the big sky. The way west, these 1,000 hills, R5. And you know what? He was the most down-to-earth kind of a guy you could ever want to run into. He would get up at 2 o'clock in the morning and write. And then he would sleep a big part of the day. And when he was awake, until he started writing again, he loved to read crime novels. And talk just about a neat guy, a fun neighbor, and just another nice guy. Okay. Jeanette Rankin, my goodness. If I'm ever remembered, I want to be remembered as the only woman who ever voted to give women the right to vote. First U.S. Congresswoman, unpopular votes against both world wars, elected in 1916, one of 50 who voted against that entry, re-elected in 1940 after that long gap, one term, U.S. entry into World War II. The vote was 388 to 1. Anybody want to guess who the one was? There she was, a lifelong pacifist and political activist. And you might remember during the Vietnam War, when there was the Women's March on Washington, this elderly woman was the one who was right at the very front of it all. She was truly one of a kind. Okay, all right, let's go to the next one. Eloise Cobell. Unhappily, she died way too quick. But this remarkable Blackfoot woman, a rancher, banker, will go down in history as the woman who won the recognition and respect for Indian people who had been cheated out of money by the federal government since the late 1800s. And it had to do with this. If there was mining activity or oil activity, who in the heck was getting the royalties? It wasn't the Indians. She fought unhappily by the time it was ruled by the United States Supreme Court. She had just passed away. But she was the great advocate, and she was designated a warrior of the Blackfeet Nation. That just didn't happen. She would not give up the course for her own people. And I always thought, boy, there was one lady, I just wish I had met her. All right, the Copper Kings, Daly and Clark. Well, the epic journals, hard chargers, greed, and hate dominated these two. Butte, Anaconda, the mining activities, the smelting activities, and that was unreal. But they dominated like nobody's business. Clark with the mines and the smelter and the banks and the newspapers, and Daly, the Anaconda and Hamilton, lock, stock, and barrel in the nation's richest copper mine. Clark wanted Helena, Daly wanted Anaconda. They spent $17 million. They were the absolute extreme about how two unscrupulous yahoos could play a major role. Boy, that's a story and a half, I'll tell you. Okay. All right. Oh, my goodness. That's the guy I was related to. Son of Swedish homesteaders with 160 acres of land. Attended a one-room school, university degree. Great storyteller, the editor's uneasy chair. He was, for a time, considered the finest editorial writer in Montana. I'm proud to be able to say he was my dad. He was so well read, that this guy read, right up until he passed away, he was reading 5 books at a time. 5 books at a time. I just could never believe that. One of the very few people that had honorary degrees, doctorates from both universities. That was the respect that he was held. I asked him one time, you know, what he stood out for you. He said, well, we got a new elementary school and a new gym, and we finally got Highway 12 paved. That's what he figured were the highlights. And then this was his greatest line, though. Keep a sharp eye on the miscreants. I mean, you never know who is going to be a miscreant. You never know. Okay. All right, Charles Marion Russell. Well, we know, voted #1 most noteworthy Montanan, beloved by all. The Hall of Famer. He always said he was born 100 years too late. Well, he was just it. The story was that when he would go down and have a cold one with the boys, he was just another one of the boys. That's just the way he was. But my goodness, what an artist. And he always said flat out that he would never have amounted to a darn thing except for a young lady, Nancy, who he happened to be married to. He always said she was the one that kept the books. All I did was draw, paint a little bit. And you know, when you go down to, or go over to the state capitol and you walk into the House of Representatives and you see the great classic piece, and if you haven't seen it, sometime you gotta see it. That was, he always considered that was the greatest piece that he ever did. There were several others that were, I thought, just as good as that one. The Last of the 5,000, Waiting for a Chinook, for example, or a couple of them that I loved. Okay, all right. Maureen and Mike Mansfield. Now, look at this very carefully. It does not say Mike and Maureen Mansfield. It says Maureen and Mike. He never, ever allowed for anything to be dedicated for him. And here it is in the state capitol. And when you go and take a look at that statue, it says Maureen and Mike Mansfield. And when you go outside the library in Missoula of U of M, because that's where he went to school, you will see it is called Maureen and Mike Mansfield Library. He was the epitome of integrity. And look at this. Navy, Marine, Army, ambassador to Japan, and here is his gravestone. Go to Arlington sometime, and you can go and look up anybody who is buried at Arlington, and you can go down and you can find that, and we'll say Mike Mansfield, Private United States Marine Corps. That's what it says. That's what it says. Okay. All right, the Devil's Brigade. Sometime you get a chance to go to Helena, go on the west side of Helena and go out to a place called Fort Harrison. This was the beginning of special operations, Spec Ops. The garrison at Fort William Henry Harrison, right outside of Helena, they were called the Devil's Brigade. This was a joint American-Canadian commando unit. They were guys who had worked in the mines, who had worked in the timber industry, who had been farmers, cowboys, ranchers, just tough, outdoorsy kinds of kids. That unit was the beginning of the Special Forces of the United States. They fought in the Aleutians, Italy, and in southern France, and they were called by the Germans as the Black Bastards, because they wore black paint and they only attacked at night. And they totally lived these values. And after the war, they met every other year. Once in Helena, and then the next year would be somewhere in BC, Alberta, or Saskatchewan. back to Helena. Always Helena, the opposite year. I always, and I get goosebumps every time I ever think of this, I was lucky enough to be their speaker one year when they were getting way, 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 way down in numbers. And when I got done, I went around and I shook hands with every single one of them. At that time, there were only about 25 of them left. Okay. George Armstrong Custer. Yep. Well, reckless, leaves it all to chance. Forgets to expect the unexpected. When leading, don't forget to lead. He didn't know what that meant. Be careful of what you wish for. History can and will capture all the good and all the worst. Graduated West Point last in his class, and one time he was the youngest Civil War general. That was very short-lived. And, of course, it was the Battle of the Little Bighorn. But until about 10 years ago, do you know what it was called? Custer's Last Stand. Somebody forgot to keep in mind that maybe Indians were also involved with the battle. Now, when you go down there and you pick up the brochure, it's the Battle of the Little Bighorn, which is what it ought to be. His wife, after he passed away, and of course everybody knew something about it because Anheuser-Busch, the beer outfit, they commissioned to have this great piece of art that was done that was as phony could be, showing him in buckskin being the last of those who were there, and the Indians are coming around and they're doing everybody in, and it was absolutely wrong. But the boys are sitting at the bar and said, yep, that Custer was one hell of a guy, wasn't he? Okay. All right. Sitting Bull, Tatanka Lakota, the spiritual leader and the glue of the Battle of the Little Bighorn, the great medicine man, the last of the Sioux chiefs to surrender. Two of his lines are among my all-time favorites. Now we are poor, we are free. No white man controls our footsteps. If we must die, we die defending our rights. In my early days, I was eager to learn and to do things, and therefore I learned quickly. Each man is good in the sight of the Great Spirit. He's buried in a very isolated area in South Dakota, pretty close to the Wyoming border. I went way out of my way one time because I had to go and pay my respects. The 1941 Montana State College football team. It was immortalized by the great writer who passed away just a couple years ago, Ivan Doig, the 11th man. And if you want, I get goosebumps with this one. If you want to read a tale, read this one. Because this great football team, and here they were, so many of these young potential leaders ended up dying in World War II. They were the dreamers with the great plans for the future. Self-starters, tough Montana kids. By the way, a lot of people aren't aware of this. Montana, percentage-wise, World War II had the second highest death rate in war. Read the book. Okay, so there he is. The writer of 13 books in Montana. And oh, This House of Sky. Oh, I love that book. His characters were regular folks leading real lives, independent, struggling, winning families. The whistling season. He was raised in the area over around White Sulphur Springs and Lenape, Montana. That's where he was raised as a kid. One time when I was out in Seattle, I was driving down the street out where one of my brothers, and I did a double take and I thought it was him. I stopped my car and I said, "You're Mr. Doig?" "Yes, I am." "I love your works. My name's Hal Stearns and I'm from Harleton, Montana." "Harleton? My goodness, I know that area of the world too." We had a very nice chat. It's the only time I ever met him, but it was in Seattle, just kind of a lucky walk. Okay, next one. Doug Chase, a longtime police officer, one of my really great pals. He was America's National Police Officer of the Year from Missoula, Montana. As kind and as nice a guy as you would ever want to run into, but here are a couple of his lines. At his last retirement, and I'm thrilled I got to speak at it, "It's greater to serve than to rule, nice to be important, more important to be nice." He and I had coffee with each other about a month ago. We're going to have it again here in a couple of days. What a great guy. Okay, next one. Joe McDonald, the national leader in American Indian education, the founder and president of Salish Kootenai College, up in the area around Pablo and your way up toward Polson, the face of Indian education, a longtime teacher, coach, administrator. Boy, what a great person. What a great person. Flat out believe the only way that Indian peoples will ever be able to do well is they've got to have an education. And we all know that about all of our own kids and about ourselves, don't we? What a neat guy. Judy Martz. She always wore a turtle pin. Here it is. And the turtle pin, she always had one on. Behold the turtle, it only moves forward with its neck out. And that was the way she subscribed to everything. Very inspirational speaker. She was an Olympic speed skater, and her own Christian faith was very important to her. She was one cool lady, and this was one of her favorite lines right here. You play the cards you're dealt, you do your best. Boy, oh boy. She was the one that got Libby designated as the National Disastrous Site, which, by the way, has been in the paper again just in the last couple of weeks, but because of the number of people that have had the problems with the asbestos. Okay. Chief Joseph of the Nez Perce, he only spent a little bit of time in Montana. Thunder rolling down the mountains. Nez Perce, Wallowa Valley, present-day Oregon, Washington, Idaho, that border area. The great spiritual leader. Trying to get away to get to the good mother country, the 1,500-mile trek. Right in the area, coming up around Laurel, heading up toward Shaman, got stopped right when they got up close to the Canadian border. But schools and roads and dams and poems and books and everything about him, he was a man who had to step forward to be a leader. And sometimes you'll run into people that are like that. Richard Austin Harlow, old-time favorite for me, because my hometown. He was the guy that built the famous Jawbone Railroad that went through Deep Creek Canyon. And before it was all done, his railroad, he literally went bankrupt with it. But the Milwaukee Railroad, in order to build through that area of Montana, had to buy out his little railway. They paid off every single debt that he ever owned. And he owed it, but he was real people person. And I'm thrilled to be able to tell you that one time I had the opportunity of meeting his daughter in both Washington, D.C. and in England. And when I met her, her name was Lady Catherine Harlow Moore. And my wife Sheila and I had the opportunity of staying with him in England. And in our bedroom, there were 2 felt seats there. And I remember the first morning going downstairs for breakfast, and I said, I see these numbers here are the numbers 13 and 14 on these beautiful chairs. Can you tell me what those were all about? Oh, that's where we sat at the coronation of Queen Elizabeth. I mean, that's what they were about. Let me tell you. Okay, next one. Bob Marshall, you know, the Bob Marshall, the wilderness. This guy, the great wilderness advocate, and I think is just about going on kicking. A rich New York kid, had all these jobs, and he absolutely was focused on the idea that we were going to see the preservation of much of as possible of our landscape. And our Bob Marshall is really, truly one of our greatest of all of our treasures. Man. Okay, next one. We're getting close. Waded Cruzado, president of Montana State University. This woman, Puerto Rican by background, she has done such an amazing job at Montana State. And her idea, she really believed so much in the idea of scholarship and of students being involved in more than just academic affairs. She's a delightful person. And I'm thrilled to be able to tell you that she is a very close friend of my wife Sheila and I. And that's who I'll end with. The Emerita Commissioner of Higher Ed, Montana's first woman Rotarian, first Montana University System Chancellor at Western, first woman college president in Nebraska, first woman president, University of Montana, one and only woman Montana Commissioner of Higher Education, longest serving commissioner, honorary doctorate of both of them. And this is to sum it up. This has always been her philosophy, and I'll end with this. You need to be a bridge builder, a communicator. Everyone should count. Everyone's special. Work harder than everybody else and build alliances and keep people informed. My dad reminded me many, many times, son, you married above your station. Well, thank you. Now, do we have just a couple minutes? Anybody have a question they want to? Oh, I didn't even, my philosophy, I guess better tell mine. I guess I have a philosophy too. Okay, you have a very fine leader right now here. And this says something about what good leadership is, I think. You do have to be a giver. And you better enjoy learning. And you better work hard. And you better trust people. And you better have teamwork and partnership and participate in your community. There's a time to lead and a time to follow and say no when necessary and yes when you can, and communicate and have fun, and always keep in mind that family better be number one. If we live with that, I think we'll all do pretty well for ourselves. I want to congratulate you all for what you have here in your community with this magnificent museum. Because of my role right now, I have been to so many of them here in Montana. Museums, thank you. And I don't know if for a community to have a museum that is any better than what you have here. You really, really have something that is downright special. And you have so many stories. That's another thing, you know, just think of the building of the Cook City Highway, or, you know, besides going over and going to pig races, but you think of the famous disaster. You think of so many things that you have right around here close by. Boy, it's like a super place. Super place. All right.